What's up, guys? Welcome to Why Go Friends English. Today, we are going to talk about some of our biggest mistakes while learning our third language.
Right. It is time for confession because we are language teachers, but we also make mistakes.
So many.
Just as a recap, in case you don't know, our second languages were Ancient Hebrew and Ancient Greek, both dead languages.
Yes.
And we were studying primarily translation. However, our third language was Mandarin. And so we lived and worked in China, and we were university ESL teachers there, and we studied Chinese there. So these are top 5 biggest mistakes that we made when learning our third language.
And honestly, the things that we did wrong with this language is the reason why we teach the way we do today. Basically, it's how do you combine the structured learning of the grammar translation? You really can't beat that as far as being an intermediate or advanced level. That's just so useful. It's so nifty. And when you are in a position where you're writing business emails and stuff all the time, you need to have grammar. However, when we were working with a language that we were just trying to communicate in, there's some ways that we went about it that was just not helpful and ended up stumping us quite a bit.
Yeah.
And so the reason we teach the way we do is because of what we did right with one method that was fundamentally wrong for learning a living language, but then what we did wrong with the opportunity we had for 4 years while living in the language that we were trying to learn.
Right.
So,
and mistakes is part of learning. If a person comes up to you and they say, I haven't made any mistakes, or I'm 100% fluent, they are guaranteed lying to you.
Or they didn't learn anything, because you learn a whole lot by making mistakes. So.
Absolutely. And language in general is more of an art than a science.
Yeah.
There's ambiguity, there's expression. It's not a one-to-one correspondence, scientifically proven kind of thing. Yeah. And that's the beauty of language. So today we're going to talk about our 5 biggest mess-ups as far as language learning goes.
Yes.
So number 1 is overcomplication.
Yeah.
So when you only know one language, you probably oversimplify a lot, which you guys are, by nature of this YouTube channel, odds are you speak more than one language.
Yes.
But when you only have one language under your belt, then you think everything corresponds to one-to-one. But once you've learned a second language, then you might make the same mistake we did in our third language, where we made things a little too complicated.
Yeah, a lot of it had to do with, I already know that Chinese is far older than English, but even though it's a lot less motley, perhaps, than English is very much a mixed, muddy language. But Mandarin has a very long history, and it's well preserved. Yes, it's updated over time because it has to, because it's a living language. But there are many, many cases in common Mandarin that you would use on a daily basis that have multiple words for the same meaning, or the same meaning that you would communicate for different ways. So, for example, I can. You're going to say that in 2 different ways, usually. Yes, at least. There's a lot more. Probably 3 ways that we would use on a daily basis while living there. But then same thing for just saying yes. There are many ways that you can say yes. Part of it was just that we just overcomplicated it. Especially me. This was my big thing, is I just made it super complicated. And so instead of just really digging in and learning the nuances, I just waited till I heard them enough times that I just naturally imitated them, which was fine because I was living there. But had I not been living there, it would have been a much bigger mess.
Would have been impossible.
Yeah, but had I also just added some structured learning and made my own flashcards at the time of the notes I was getting from this living context around me, I would have been speaking Mandarin so much faster than I did. Okay. So that was definitely probably my biggest confession there. Is I overcomplicated it.
Mistake number 2 is we were at times trying to use grammar translation methods instead of a communicative approach.
Because it's all we knew.
Yeah.
It's all we knew by this point.
So I had studied Spanish. That was actually my second language, and Ancient Hebrew. Both of those heavily focused on translation, not communication.
Yeah.
It was, let's take this sentence, whether it's an oral sentence, like, where's the bathroom? And then let's try to translate it over and be able to take a test on it, because that's what our teachers were heavily focused on, is, can you pass the test?
Yeah.
And so as a result, when we got to China, we were really ill-equipped.
Well, there was also no teacher there. Like, we could have, but we didn't have time to while working and trying to make a living and cooked everything from chopped vegetables. Like, we just didn't have time to sit down and do hours and hours and hours of language practice. So you walk in there with your toolbox set for grammar translation method, which takes forever, and you don't have that. All of a sudden, you're just learning how to get by, really, by imitating and sounding like a baby. And that's exactly what we felt. We felt like we were language babies.
A good example, I think, of this is time. So in grammar translation method, you have, feels like a lot of all the time in the world. You have a sentence in front of you. It's not going to run away. It's going to stand right there. And so your job is just to translate it over. But when you're actually in a grocery store talking to the cashier and she's telling you something, you have no idea what she's saying.
Yeah.
You can't just take all the time in the world. There's people behind you. There's a baby crying. Like, I mean, there's too much stuff that's going on that you need that. You need that time. Feels like an immediate thing as opposed to just like a resource that's infinite.
And you have your body language, which is nice.
Yeah.
Paralanguage is great over grammar translation method because you can mime.
Yeah.
Worst case scenario, you could say, I want this, this, and this. And just point to random things on the menu and just see what comes out.
Which we definitely did.
A lot. It was great.
The third mistake that we made in learning our third language is being impatient. So everybody's impatient to try to learn a language as fast as possible. We were too, but it was even more so because we were surrounded by the language we were supposed to be able to communicate in. When we got to China, we didn't know but 2 words in Chinese. Hello and thank you. And that was it. We didn't know anything about their writing system. We didn't know anything about their pronunciation system.
Yeah.
And so for us, we were really frustrated because we wanted to be surviving now. We don't want to wait 2 weeks to learn the alphabet system before we start learning the language because we gotta learn it now. We were very impatient, and it's really hard to be patient when, like, kids, for example, they can spend 3 years, 2 years listening to a language before they even start speaking it.
Yeah, we had to constantly remind ourselves that we were language babies. And honestly, we didn't really have to actively remind ourselves of that. We were just reminded all the time. But there was this element of, I really need to know how to communicate, and I need to know that I'm not getting either ripped off or I'm not causing someone else's problems by my lack of the ability to speak. So it's easy for us to want to push into intermediate stuff way before we had the foundation to do so. Before we could really hear the tones, for example, to tonal language. So there were a lot of issues that we ran into just trying to just go full speed ahead. Like, this is our third language. It's not our first rodeo. Let's go. And I mean, some languages, I'm sure you can do that. Mandarin was not one of them.
Mistake number 4 isn't necessarily a mistake. It wasn't our fault necessarily. There was no access to professional resources for learning Mandarin at the time.
Well, for Mandarin acquisition, naturally.
Right.
The way that we're really beginning to feel that we needed to be learning a language, living language around us. You can use grammar translation and the classic teacher classroom method and stuff like that just fine with dead languages and for reading and writing classes even. But if you're just trying to get out there and speak like the people around you speak, the problem is we had the textbooks, we had CDs, we had even some teachers that could speak some Mandarin. We did that for a little bit. Voice recordings. The problem is that was textbook Mandarin, which is nothing like the Cantonese we were hearing and the pidgin that we were hearing down where we were. What we were learning in these books was not at all what was spoken outside. There were some things that were similar and we could kind of understand that it was similar and this is just the way they speak in the local dialect, but the dialect we were around was very, very strong. So once we had made headway in a lesson, we couldn't actually use it, which was incredibly frustrating. But that's just one of those things. It's like, had we had a natural Mandarin acquisition thing, a website, for example, of this is how we speak here. And this is the textbook standard, and this is how we say it here. That would have been so helpful. So helpful. But we didn't have that. We didn't have access to anything like that. There was nothing like that. Everybody just believed, like, I mean, if we hit you with a textbook, you're going to learn it eventually. And it's just like, not at all. That was perhaps not our direct mistake, but it was one of the things that was severely lacking. One of those things we hope to fill in the English realm as well. Mistake
number 5 is not having enough practice time with an experienced tutor. So in China, there was a lot of people that would offer help to us in teaching Chinese. We even tried to do the thing where you teach English and then they teach you Chinese. But inevitably, there was always the power struggle, language power struggle would kind of play out to one of somebody's favor. Normally, we'd be teaching more English than we would be learning Chinese.
And often because they were just at the point where they were intermediate or high intermediate English speakers, and they could just express a lot more than we mere beginners could express. And so I think part of it was their frustration versus ours. It was difficult, and we really genuinely wanted to help them understand like a certain grammar structure, for example, that they came across in a book, or hey, can you look over my paper? Oh, you don't want to write it this way and this is why. And by that time, like the hour or 2 hours was already gone. We were stepping up to teach.
Yeah.
And the language we both knew was English. And so what happened is Chinese just fell by the wayside, and we wound up leaving without any significant amount of practice in Mandarin with an experienced tutor. What we learned was what we picked up from living there.
Yeah, honestly, the best practice for me was being able to go get packages outside of university, going to the grocery store, or doing some other random small chore. Because if I got outside the university, odds are the old men or older women that I talked to couldn't speak English. So I actually was able to practice a lot more just because I went and got most of the packages or something like that.
Right. And there were lots of trips that we took with friends who couldn't speak English at all. So we just had to make it.
Yeah.
And we had no idea what was going on half the time, but that's okay. That's how we learned what we learned. And that was great. That's probably the stuff we remember the most as far as language 2 years out of the country. Language acquisition is really important as naturally as you can get it. But you need some of that structure as well, because that'll fast track you a bit. But that was just one of those things that was really fascinating to us.
More importantly for you guys, mistakes is how you learn a language.
Yes.
As much as people will try to tell you that the better score you ought to look for is a 90 or a 95%, oftentimes it's when you take a test and you get a 40%, or you're talking to somebody and it's obvious that the communication is not happening.
Yeah.
Those times are honestly the times where you learn and acquire more language. If I take a test and I get 100% on the test, I didn't learn anything through the test. But if I take a test and I make a 30% on the test, you can bet that I learned something on that test, even if it was that I didn't know very much.
Yeah, exactly.
Guys, keep on looking out. I know that mistakes are hard, but keep looking out for them. Watch them, learn from them, and hopefully your English will get better and better.
Absolutely.
So if you guys want to check out more videos, hit subscribe, and we'll catch you guys on the next one.
That's it. Bye.